Welcome to Strain on the Game, the podcast that reveals what it really takes to keep elite footballers performing at the highest level. I'm Stephen Warnock, former Premier League player, joined by physical performance expert Adrian Lamb. From training ground truths to the financial impact of fitness, we discuss the often overlooked challenges behind the beautiful game. Welcome to another episode of Strain on the Game. This episode is all about why Adrian Lamb has got a job and why he can justify having a job. And this is all about the warm-up. The warm-up before training, the warm-up before a game. He had no idea how I was going to intro this section, but this is all about your job. Job Justification Podcast Day.
Brilliant. I had no idea that was how you're going to introduce that podcast. That's the best intro that we've done in however many episodes.
You really choked on your coffee.
I was going to say that was fantastic. But it's funny because it's true. Whenever the players start moaning about the warm up, not this shit again. So hey, You do realise that this is what pays my bills, pays my mortgage, don't you? Job Justification Day. Yeah.
Well, before we get into it, have you been?
Yeah. Well, anybody watching this podcast on YouTube or on Spotify video will notice I'm not my normal sort of well-groomed and well-turned-out self. And that's because we're recording this episode on the 1st of December, and it's the first Monday after Thanksgiving. And as a non-American living in America, I haven't really worked out what Thanksgiving's all about yet. So I've just dived into it. I've two-footed Thanksgiving.
It's giving thanks to sugar. That's essentially what it is. That's what I've learned Thanksgiving is.
I'm giving thanks to the fact that there's no more ice cream left in the house and pumpkin pie's disappeared and all that, because I have been following the Benny McCarthy diet for the past, since Thursday? Well, probably before that, really. And it's now Monday. So, yeah, it's been a bit of a shock to the system. I'm into day 30 of wearing the Whoop.
Yeah.
And my Whoop actually thinks that my fitness goals are clinical morbid obesity.
And you're living up to them.
Well, it's, I've started off at a very low level, Whoop-wise, due to Thanksgiving. So things can only get better. I could get the most improved Whoop athlete of 2026.
Did you go for the one at the membership where you can find out your Whoop age?
I have, but I haven't yet.
You haven't logged it long enough yet?
Yeah, I think that's coming in the next few days.
Oh, it's a shock to the system, mate.
I'm hoping it's not older than my actual age, because that's not good for a fitness coach, is it? Your Whoop age.
I think you'll be quite low.
Well, we live in hope, don't we? But yeah, if my Whoop age ends up being 57 or something, then we need to take
problems.
Yeah, we need to take measures to address that, don't we?
Yeah. Well, I'm also in one of those situations at the moment where I'm quite pissed off because our Christmas decks have gone up and the Christmas tree has gone exactly where the podcast was. So I have my little area and I've had to move and I'm not happy. It just feels so unfamiliar. So Kelly, our producer, has got a lot to answer for.
The Ebenezer Scrooge of podcasting.
I was like, do I put the Christmas tree in the background? But then that's not the right thing to do. No, so I've tried to hang a picture up or an old shirt behind me.
What shirt is that?
Lighting on it.
What shirt is that?
Liverpool one from 5, the year we won the Champions League. So it's it's my first shirt that I made my debut in.
That's a good one to have, isn't
AK Graz in the Arnold Schwarzenegger Stadium. There's one for you.
Well, local celebrity. I haven't seen Arnold on his bike. I don't say we often see him. It's not like he's the village postman knocking about the place. But he has been seen not far from where I live. He's cycling to Gold's Gym in Venice Beach. He cycles down from Santa Monica. Although I did see John McEnroe yesterday. Yeah,
magic. Love that.
Yeah, we were out for dinner last night with the family. The in-laws are over for Thanksgiving, which is why I've been relegated to the bedroom for this episode, in case anybody was wondering.
We all get put in our place, don't we?
But I was like, that man looks remarkably like John McEnroe, and in fact, it turned out to be John McEnroe. So, Los Angeles. I wonder if he was looking at me and thinking, that's that bloke from Strain on the Game. I
I
shouldn't have
think he
thought
probably,
so.
yeah, he might have been. You should have said. Hope you're listening. You should have tried to get him on as a guest.
I should have gone over and said, for banter, just come over and ask for a selfie with me just to impress my mother-in-law. Anyway, we've gone
Let's get into why you've got a job and just job justification.
massively off piece. So yeah, job justification day. So warm-ups probably the most difficult part of my job, although it's the reason why I am in a job.
Most difficult.
Well, it's the worst part of the job, isn't it? Because you do.
Well, there you go.
Right.
Put the right words together.
Right, yeah. Most difficult in terms of challenging, because you've got 18, 20, 22 players, and you're 2 weeks into this pre-season period, and the same old voices start chirping up, not this shit again. Turn the page, Lammy. Any chance of getting the balls out and all of that?
Hey,
Nonsense.
can I ask a quick question before we get into this? So
Absolutely,
you just mentioned there about the start of the season. Do you all get sent a book with a new warm up on it? Because it looks like when everyone, like, you always pull out one new move in the summer, but then you look across at the other team and they've all got that one new move as well.
Yeah, we go to a conference. It's a secret society. You've got to have a special handshake to get in at the door.
Honestly,
Well,
you make it up as you go along, you lot, don't you?
well, of course we do. Yeah. This podcast is all about lifting the veil on the secrets of fitness coaching. Yeah, we just make it up as we go along. We feel what we fancy. There's no science behind it. Yeah, no, I mean, it's, if we try to get some element of seriousness into this conversation now.
Okay, go on, let's go for it.
If we think about, what is the purpose of the warm-up? Right, it's very simple. We're elevating the physical state of the players from being at rest into a state of heightened physical readiness, conducive to the physical demands of the session. And one of the reasons why they're challenging, because players often don't enjoy that process, and it can be quite difficult to deliver a challenging, interesting warm-up to 20 people. It's that balance between consistency. One of the things that we're going to talk about here is the warm-up isn't just limited to being a period of preparation for the players. There's more to it than that. It's more important than that. Consistency in terms of delivering exercises that I know are going to improve and develop the players physically, versus variation, keeping players mentally engaged with the warm-up process.
Yeah.
And players, and I'm sure that you've got anecdotes and memories about players who would actively try to sabotage the warm-up. And then you've also got those players. Now, you were all right. You were okay. That's you were very, very professional. There would be a certain time when you would be like, not, look, what are we doing this? This has been going on for 20 minutes. One of the things actually that's interesting about coaches, when we're in those coaching meetings in the morning, where another secret society that players don't know what's going on in, the door gets shut and like, what's going on in there? For some reason, managers and coaches were always willing to give me any amount of warm-up time at all. It was like, how long do you need for the warm-up? 10 minutes. 10 minutes is more than enough. Take 20 minutes. And then they'd come out with this classic line of, give them a really good warm-up. Really good warm-up. I was going to give them one of those shit warm-ups that I normally do, but now you've said that, I'll give them a good one. And one of the things that I talk about with players and with younger coaches is let's say an average warm-up lasts 15 minutes. Okay, 15 minutes. And you've got 4 warm-ups a week in training. And we're going to take the match day warm-up out of this because it's slightly different. That's about preparing for the game. But I'm talking about from a training perspective and using the warm-up as a training session. That 15 minutes aggregates and accumulates into a significant amount of contact time between me and the players. So if I can use that time wisely and well, then I can fulfill a huge amount of my performance goals with the players without really them being aware of it, because they think they're just warming up. So I get a lot of my speed mechanic drills done in the warm-up. my agility mechanics and my acceleration, deceleration, change of direction work without the ball from a coaching point of view. I get that done in the warm-up. I can get a massive amount of my injury reduction work done in the warm-up. And I think we think of the warm-up primarily in a short-term perspective as being making sure the players don't get injured in the training session. But actually, there's a long-term injury prevention process, which I can deliver a lot of the exercises in the warm-up, which have long-term benefits in terms of reducing the injuries. But in order to deliver that within the framework of a warm-up, I've got to follow a very specific structure and I've got very specific content. And again, that idea of consistency and exposing players consistently to those exercises, which is where I think a lot of player frustrations come in. And that's why a lot of players kind of get bored within the warm-up, because we're trying to drip feed exercises inconsistently. But one of the ways we're going to be talking about in this podcast about the ways of delivering is known as the RAMP protocol, all right, which is an acronym. It stands for Raise, Activate, Mobilise, and Potentiate. So even though you think it's job justification for fitness
I
coaches,
think you've just made
there
that
is
word
actually
up.
a structure and there is a science behind it.
I think you've
So
just
on
made
that,
that up.
before we get into it, just like you'll know. There's those two types of play. What was your view as a player going into warm-ups? Was it did you just think of it as something that had to be done before the actual training session, and the training session was the important thing, or were you aware of this kind of bigger picture?
I was always frightened of getting injured, so I always took it very seriously and thought it was quite important. Probably, I always felt like it was part of the psychological edge of getting yourself ready for either training or certainly a game. I always felt like if you ticked off a good warm-up, you felt like you were in a good place to go into the game. I think that was one of the things I always looked at. So yeah, I always took them pretty seriously. And also as well, I knew they weren't easy for you guys as well. So I didn't want to be a knob. Like,
Yeah,
I can do that messing about with you, and there was a
yeah,
few like jibes and things like that, and we'd always have a laugh, but I'd always do it properly. I think I was always one of the ones who would be at the front to try and set a standard to help you out. But I think that was more from the fact of I was either vice captain or captain at clubs. So you
yeah.
always take that as your role to set the standard to do things right.
Yeah, no, and that's important. That's really important for us as fitness coaches, having the leadership group on side, because you can quickly lose players as a coach, and you
100%.
can very, very quickly lose. Which players come to mind that maybe we've both worked with, or maybe on your own, who the good warmer-uppers and the saboteurs, the activists within the warm-up?
Well, the one who springs to mind, and I think you worked with him for a little period of time, was Luke Young. But
Yeah,
Youngie was one of them guys where he'd do the warm-up properly, but if it wasn't set up properly, he was fuming because he realised the importance. He had bad hips, Youngie, and he'd always suffered with stiffness of the hips and things like that. So he always needed longer. So he'd actually go out before the lads. And I remember when we were at Villa, the first year I got there, it was Martin O'Neill who was in charge, and he had this fitness coach who wasn't really a fitness coach. I think he was just a mate of Martin O'Neill's I think he was a black belt in judo or something. But
yeah,
Youngie would take the warm-ups. Youngie would go and get the ladders out. He'd go and get the hurdles out. And he'd go, like, most of the time, Jim, this fitness instructor, would be like, right, you've got 15 minutes, get yourselves warm. It's like, what? There was
yeah,
no process to it, no thought to it or whatsoever. So Youngie would be like, right, I've set everything up. Come on, we're going for a jog first. And he'd literally get everything going himself.
right.
So he was like a little bit of both. If it wasn't done properly, he was pissed off, but then he'd make sure it was done properly. So yeah.
Yeah,
But I think most of the lads appreciate, I think you've just got different styles of warming up and people who know the bodies and how they can get into things.
yeah. And then also, I mean, there's a different podcast that we've got lined up where we're talking about activation, which is a completely different process where players are in the gym beforehand. So this isn't necessarily what we're going to talk about today, but one of the principles of training is everything has to be specific to the way that we play and the way that we train, and we have to prepare specifically according to the game model, which is something that we've spoken about quite a lot on this podcast. The warm-up's no different. The warm-up isn't separate to the main body of the training session. It's part of the training session itself. And the warm-up should flow into the training session. It's not just a period of general exercises, 4 laps of the pitch and touch your toes a couple of times and stretch your groins and off you go. I always remember that when I sort of first started out, 2001, 2002 was when I first started working in football. You still had some of these coaches that had been in for a while, and you would do these modern warm-ups, dynamic flex warm-ups, which were totally different to what they experienced as players. And then the balls would come out and they'd do a passing drill. And then, as they were moving from one passing drill to the next, they would always say, right, have a proper stretch. And I was thinking, they've had a proper stretch. I've just spent 20 minutes. I've just spent 20 minutes giving them a proper stretch. Well, that was just some sort of like verbal tick that they would have, right? Have a proper stretch. And, you'd have players stretching the calves and the groins and the hamstrings and things. So that was but one of the things that we've spoken about a couple of times, in fact, we did an episode on this, was tactical periodization, how we organize training throughout the week, and it differs according to different physical objectives. So we've got a strength day, and when we say strength, we mean locomotor strength. Lots of explosive accelerations and explosive high-intensity changes of direction and decelerations. And then we've got our endurance day, where we're looking to get high heart rates, lots of red zone above 85% of maximum heart rate, and lots of relative distance, meters per minute. And then we've got a speed day, where we're looking at maximum velocity movements, getting players up to the maximum speed, counter-attacking drills, things like that. The warm-up has to be specific. We have to prepare players specifically to meet these specific physical demands. So the warm-up is not just a general thing that players have to go through before training. It's part of the training session itself. We're developing the players' physical capabilities of meeting these very, very different training sessions. If your physical component and your technical component and your tactical component of the training session is different, then logically your warm-up has to be different, and it has to be specific. So if I'm trying to deliver specificity within the warm-up, I can address that in 4 key areas. The first one is probably the most important. I need to address the movement demands of the session. So the type of movements that the players are going to be performing. So let's say if it's a strength day, we might have a heavy pressing session. The head coach, the manager wants to work on pressing. Then I know that that's going to involve a lot of accelerations, explosive movements over 5-10 meters, high-intensity decelerations, aggressive changes of direction. So I've got to prepare the players to perform those movements. So that's an area of specificity I need to address. The second is I need to address the physiological demands of the session. So what are the work-rest ratios within the session? We've designed this in the meeting in the morning. What are the predominant energy systems to get into sports science? And what are the cardiovascular, the heart rate demands of the session? So I can address that within the warm-up. The third one is a really important one, and you've sort of alluded to this as well. What are the injury risk factors associated with that particular session? So if it's a speed day and we've got, let's say, counter-attack drills where there's lots of sprint volume and players are really getting up to the maximum speeds, then I know there's a high sprint demand to that, and we know that hamstring injuries happen when players sprint. So I need to address those unique injuries which are associated with particular sessions. If it's a pressing session, then I know that change of direction movements stress the groins and have a lot of load going through the adductors. So I might address that within. So it depends on the training session. And sometimes the fourth area is if I've got certain players who've got acute injury history, I might address that. And that's a difficult one to do because you've got perhaps 18, 20, 22 players. So to address the individual needs of a specific player can be quite difficult. And often what I'll do is I'll bring them out a little bit earlier, or we'll address it within the activation session. So I need to have some degree of individualization for certain players within that warm-up structure.
I was going to ask that because I was going to say it's not a one rule fits all or one session fits all planner, is it? And the other thing I was going to ask you was, do you almost have a default to what you know you're going to go to? Because you're saying there, I plan that in the morning.
Yeah.
So it's very much a situation of got to think on your feet. I've got 22 players. How am I going to fit this in? And what am I going to do? Surely you've got to have an idea or an
Yeah.
sort of thought process as to how you're going to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've got a library. You'll know this, having worked with me extensively in the past. I've got a library of warm-ups. So
You've
if
got
I know
4.
that I've got 4 warm-ups, yeah. Change is not good. This idea between the balance between consistency and variation, what I tend to do is I lean more towards consistency.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and you generally find that you put in, you can put old wine in new bottles and confuse the hell out of players because you're doing the same exercises in a slightly different way. He's playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order. So it's that kind of thing where we're sort of working through that process, but we might ask players to do it in a slightly different way. And as thought processes have gone on, I think it's up to the fitness coach to provide that variety because, as you've said quite rightly, that part of the preparation process is psychological. I've got to make sure that players are mentally prepared. We've got to face the reality that if players don't like doing warm-ups, and if you're doing the same old warm-up every single day, which, it's quite easy to do, then players can be demotivated by that. They feel
Yeah.
flat and all the rest of it.
So here's another question for you then. So is there ever a time where you look at a warm up and you think, ooh, they like that one? And you mark it down as yeah, that one definitely getting used again. And that's a good motivator or it's a good one. And the
Yeah.
other thing is, do you actually assess your warm ups alongside injuries? So do you understand that? So if
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
done
No,
warm ups for a 2-week period and you go, oh, we picked up no injuries there.
yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's a highly relevant question. Do you cast your mind back to a situation in at Blackburn? You were still there, where for some reason we started picking up 1 or 2 adductors, kind of groin injuries that were they were happening more frequently than was normal. And so you
Yeah.
start looking at things. And one of the things I looked at was the fact that we used to do the boxes, what people in the States will call rondos, before we did the warm-up as a bit of
Okay, got you.
as a bit of a spangle. And, just to keep players, motivated. Players love boxes, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
Get players megged and, but they're competitive. To be done right, they've got to be competitive. So we would do our activation in the gym and then we'd come out and we'd do the boxes. And at that time of year in northwest England, there'd been significant rainfall. The ground was
Softer.
It was softer in the sort of first inch, but then it was hard. The modern
Sorry
deco
for
pitches.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it was slippy, and then there was footwear issues where players weren't using studs; they were using blades, and I think all of that sort of fed into this issue. So I remember Keith Andrews saying, "Don't you dare take the rondos away! Don't you dare take the boxes away!" Because we were looking at it and thinking, why are these injuries happening? So we'll still do the boxes, but it makes sense to do them after the warm up. Much more sense to do them after the warm up, which is something that I was advocating quite strongly from the very beginning. Why are we doing these competitive boxes before we've got the players ready to do competitive boxes? Because they're agility movements and we'll. So yeah, that we do review that. The other thing we review is kind of the physical outputs with the GPS. And we look at how if we talk about the specificity and exposing players in a controlled way to acceleration, deceleration, change of direction activities, what is the load that we're looking at from a GPS point of view, and how does that compare to the load that the players are experiencing in the training session itself? So looking at the effectiveness of that. So yeah, we do look at how are we relating injuries. You always want to trace back. There's injuries are caused by multiple different factors, aren't they? But certainly, what are we doing in the warm up which may reduce these injuries from happening? So that comes into the benefits of a well planned warm up. For me, there's 2 benefits. Firstly, performance, and secondly, injury reduction or injury prevention, but I talk in terms of injury reduction, reducing the incidence of injuries. That injury reduction process is, you probably think more short term in terms of, I don't want to get injured in this session, so I need to get a good warm up. But actually, there's long term benefits for injury reduction as well. You know, there's a lot of the activities, a lot of the exercises that we expose players to in warm ups will have long term consequences in increasing their robustness and their ability to withstand injury. So, you know, if we talk about the performance benefits of the warm up, and then we talk about the injury benefits of the warm up, it goes back to that principle of specificity where I've talked about specific movement preparation. And a big part of that is neuromuscular in nature. So strengthening neuromuscular connections, the link between the brain and the muscles.
Yeah.
So using warm-up exercise which stimulate the neural pathways and recruit more muscular activity to specific movements. I remember when I was a really young fitness coach, before I'd actually started working in professional football, I was working at a university, at a human performance unit there. And that's actually how I ended up getting into football, because one of the clients was Newcastle United Academy. But one of my early mentors coming out of university and working as a fitness coach, he said something that's always sat with me, which is, your role as a fitness coach is to improve the technical efficiency and the technical quality of movement. Doesn't matter who you're working with. You're working with rowers or golfers or rugby players or football players. You're trying to improve the quality of their movement, make it more precise, make it more efficient. Everything that we do, warm-ups, gym, strength work, injury prevention work, we don't train muscles, we train movements. And that is if you want to talk about a fundamental philosophy in one line, that's it. Don't train muscles, train movements. So priming the neuromuscular system to be able to perform these football-specific movements is an important performance function of the warm-up. You know, we're trying, if the central nervous system is slow, then the player's ability to perform really complex movements. Footballers have to perform really, really complex movements, but they also have to perform explosive movements. So if we're recruiting more muscles faster into these movements, and explosiveness, strength, speed, power, deceleration, change of direction, all of these things that players have to perform in a very short space of time, within a few seconds of each other in training. You see the explosive nature of football. That's all related to the neural system. So enhancing muscular coordination and improving the quality of movement is a long-term benefit of exposing players consistently to these warm-up exercise. Another part of that is improved reaction times. And I think we saw at the weekend how players who, information processing, movement response, I can get to that ball before the opposition. If you mistime that, especially now in a game with VAR, the chances are you're going to get a red card. So warm-ups in a long-term process play into that. So we sort of think of warm-ups, the benefits of a warm-up being, you said about Youngie there, players being less stiff in the hips. Yeah, we reduce that resistance, that viscous resistance in muscles and joints. So that's part of it. Getting your breathing rate up, getting your blood flow up, oxygen delivery to the muscles, metabolic reactions in terms of, and energy systems and getting the right energy systems stimulated and delivering energy to the working muscles, and psychological readiness. So making it engaging, making it interesting to players, and challenging players in terms of their decision making, which is that potentiate aspect of the warm up, which we're going to get into. And then, if I can move on to the second one, the second benefit of the warm up, which is the injury reduction. Football, this is a really, really important one for me, and it's something that I work on in the gym a lot, is that football's played in an unstable environment for players. So we're looking at the ways that players move and trying to eliminate dysfunctional movements. Football isn't like sprinting. It's not like swimming. It's not like it's played in 360 degrees. It's chaos. It's absolute chaos again. So
Yeah.
we have to prepare players to be robust and to be resilient enough to deal with that chaos. So part of that, and I can deliver a lot of that in the warm-up. If I expose players to controlled elements of instability, then their ability to cope with that unstable environment that football is so much better. And that plays into a long-term injury reduction process.
Is that why throw head catch was involved?
Throw head catch, push
Wow.
with rugby tackle pads.
Yeah.
You just thought it was because myself and Dave Fever had backgrounds in rugby, but no.
I was just thinking you just want to get a bit of rugby in here.
Yeah, brilliant.
Embarrass the lads who can't catch and throw.
Hit me. Come on, hit me. Don't threaten me.
Yeah.
All of those things. So what we're trying to, but there's method behind the madness. So
Of course, yeah.
the mental side of that, it's fun. So if you can have a fun warm up but still achieve these technical goals, that's great. You can't do it every day because we can't have too much fun. We're here to do a job. Don't be having fun. But yeah, so what we're trying to develop there, we're trying to improve proprioception. What are the proprioceptors are these sensory receptors that sit in the muscles and the joints and provide the brain with information about the position of the body in time and space and the orientation of the body and the movement of the body. We're trying to improve balance and stability, the ability of the body to regain stability from a highly unstable position. So, I'm really, really big on that. Improve the interaction between the player and this chaotic environment that they find themselves in. And a big one is improve the ability of the player to absorb external forces. So that's opposition players.
Yeah.
When you need to develop strength, you're often in a single leg stance because you're trying to compete for the ball or protect the ball. Landing mechanics. I remember once at Newcastle, we had a senior fitness coach I think he was going to do a presentation, a conference or something like that. So one of the things he asked the club photographer to do was take still photographs of players landing from a header or riding a tackle. And some of the things that came out were horrific. When
Can
you look at
imagine,
them in a still, you're like, oh my God, players coming down with one leg up in the air and the other leg is fully braced and they're landed on that and the body's twisted round and the head's in a funny position. And you think, how's he not done an ACL from that?
Yeah.
And they do that repeatedly. It's kind of like that one where you see a tackle in slow motion. It looks much worse than it does you're like, oh my, that's terrible. So we looked at that and we think, and part of this presentation that this senior fitness coach was putting together was, this is what we are preparing players to do. This is the environment that they live in. So, how do we prepare them for this? How do we prepare players to land from that? And you might remember sometimes there was those moments when clubs would bring in sprint coaches to try and improve the speed and everything. Players don't run like sprinters. Footballers don't run like sprinters. It's completely different. Footballers run like footballers because of that, because they live in that chaotic, unstable environment. Yes, there is a place for sprint mechanics, but there's also, we've got to be mindful that footballers run differently. So on that injury prevention sort of theme that we're talking about, if we're talking about how warm-ups have adapted and changed in recent times, not my warm-ups. My warm-ups have stayed the same for the past 20 years. I don't need to change a good thing, do you? But one of the things that many Premier League clubs are doing now, not only within the warm-up, but within the broader training process, is they're adopting these principles from a practitioner called Franz Bosch. Now, we're going to touch on this now, but this is a podcast in itself. And we're going to we're lining somebody up to come in and sort of talk about these Bosch principles.
Are we getting Franz Bosch on, or is he no longer with us?
No, Franz Bosch is still with us.
Is he still? Well, we'll get him on. Come on, Franz, on you come.
We might have to we might have to remortgage the house to get him on because he's very expensive. But he'll get on. We'll kidnap him. Nobody will know. Nobody will know. Get in the back of the van, Franz. So a lot of clubs are adopting these Bosch principles. I do like saying the word Bosch, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that frequently for the rest of this
Don't get
podcast.
like that annoying fella on Instagram. I don't know what his name is, and he just
Who's
keeps on
that?
saying it. I'm like, fuck off, mate. I don't know what his name is. He just goes, Bosh, and you're like, "Oh, well done."
What? When things get hit or something?
No, he just says it, and everyone buzzes off it, and I'm like, it's like that knob. It's like that fella who did the Salt Bay for a bit, and it was like, oh, look at me fucking pouring salt, and everyone was like, oh, that's Boss. And then and then this guy goes around going, Bosh, and everyone thinks he's great, and I'm like, I think his son's a boxer. I can't think he got beat the other week.
All right.
But
Well, we better
anyway.
not. We better not insult him in case he sends his son round. But Salt Bay's done all right out of it. He won the World Cup.
Yeah, but he did win the World Cup. Yeah,
How embarrassing was that, by the way?
fraud. Yeah, don't get me started on him. He's one of my pet hates.
Is he?
Absolute pet. Oh, one of my biggest pet hates. Cannot stand the guy.
But I look forward to him turning up for the World Cup next year. By the way, complete aside, World Cup fever is starting to build in the United States. Yeah, there was the Los Angeles. I'm not sure what he is, but the ambassador, the main focal point for the Los Angeles World Cup games has been announced, and I'm delighted to share with you that it's Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg is like, he gets involved in everything. He's brilliant.
He loves it.
He
was
loves
in the Olympics and everything, wasn't he?
The Olympics, he was absolutely all over it.
Now he's part owner of Swansea as well.
I did not know that.
Come on, keep up, mate.
Well, I mean, we talked about ownership and how they sacked managers last week, didn't we, in a recent podcast? But right, let's get back on track. We've got off piste again.
Talking about.
Yeah, Bosch. Right, Franz Bosch. So part of the principles, you might have seen some of these exercises you're on social media far more than I am, but you might have seen some of these exercises. Players with sticks over their heads and working with aqua bags and working with. This is all part of this this idea or this philosophy that football is played in an unstable environment. So part of Bosch's principles is to reduce injuries by focusing firstly on movement quality, but also adapting movement to different environments. And players are exposed to lots of different environments, and through that developing robustness. So it's developed a lot of his philosophy and a lot of his methods are based around chaos theory. You know, the fact that football is a chaotic thing. It's not a linear sport like sprinting. So he doesn't emphasize perfect running technique. So that's a shift away from the sprint mechanics drills that we perhaps used to do in
Well, I kind of say, if you watch most sprinters in a race, they're very similar, aren't they? Whereas if you watch most footballers run, they've all got different running gaits, running styles.
Yeah, and that individualized sort of nature of movement is fundamentally important, I think. You know, we shouldn't try to develop players who conform to very rigid styles of movement. We should allow them to develop their own, as long as those.
Have you ever seen Usain Bolt try to run with a football?
No.
He's played in that soccer aid quite a few times.
Yeah, didn't he? Yeah.
And then he tried to make it as a footballer in, I think it was Australia, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's a completely different skill set when you put a football at someone's feet and you go, you've got to run as fast as you can with that.
Yeah.
Whilst trying to get tackled and pulled back and
whilst an aggressive left back is trying to put you into row Z.
Kukureya.
Stephen Warnock, I was thinking of. He's the man. So one of Bosch's principles and one of the arguments is that players rarely repeat the same motion identically. So instead of coaching ideal, perfect technique, what we should be training is movement patterns, which players can adapt to under stress, external stress, fatigue, because that's an important one, how your movement changes when you're fatigued and you're recruiting different muscles into the movement. And sometimes these movements are not perfect for that movement and they're stressed in different ways. And unpredictability, you know, the unpredictable nature of football is really interesting. So including those movements within a warm-up and within a broader training spectrum so that when these muscles and joints and muscle tissues become overloaded, they're robust enough to deal with it. So again, he will use external tools, like he talks about things like perturbations. So you'll see elastic bands with weights attached to them, which require the player to restore their balance. He'll use aqua bags, with large rectangular sort of bags with a little bit of water in them, and as you move it, obviously all the water then moves to the other end of the bag, which means that you've got this external force pulling you over there. And you'll remember some of the strength exercises. I like to use a lot of the cable movements and get players moving through different ranges of movement with controlled levels of instability on one leg. So that's kind of somewhere where the warm-up has sort of progressed, or I would say probably the last 7 or 8 years, and now we're seeing a lot more of clubs adopting these Franz Bosch principles. But like I said, we're going to do an episode where we're really just looking at that. It's going to be quite a technical episode. So that's kind of like the new school versus the old school idea of 4 laps of the pitch and static stretching. So you've, I don't know,
Well, I've got a question for you.
Excellent.
So, match day, subs who are games underway, where's the exercise bike gone?
It's in the dressing room.
Do you remember it?
Yeah,
when they put them on
yeah.
the side of the pitch. What did you make of that? And like, if you could have your say now, how would you warm players up on the side of the pitch? Because I always think whenever players come onto the pitch, they're not warm.
No, you're right. So part of that is, again, weather. Weather is a tough one. It's always easier to get players out warming up in August, September than it is in February, March, isn't it? You know what I mean? And that was always normally around the 20-minute mark in the first half. Right? 3 subs, out you go. Nothing. And then you turn around and there's a senior player, like they're throwing the bibs at each other, aren't they? They're like, you go, no, you go, you. And the senior players saying to the younger ones, you're going before me.
Yeah.
And then they'll go out, they'll try to get the bib over the world's biggest bench coat. They'll jog down to the corner and then they'll stretch their left calf for 5 minutes and not do any movement because it's too cold. And it's a tough one because I remember Alan Smith, Smudger, he would say, I don't like warming up when the game's on because I get a sweat on, because he used to do it properly. He's brilliant, Smudge.
Yeah.
So he'd do the warm-up properly and he'd get a sweat on, and then he'd come and sit down
Cool
and
down.
He's getting cold again and it's really uncomfortable. I kind of get that. So there's a balance between what's right from a scientific point of view or from a fitness coach's point of view and actually delivering that. So the exercise bike was quite a good compromise because, it kept, what are we looking for at this point of the warm-up? Before we're looking at oxygen delivery, keeping the blood flow high, keeping the muscle temperature up. Yeah, the exercise bike kind of did that and kept the players going. I think it was one that we adopted from rugby, wasn't it? Rugby players often had the bikes at the side because, especially rugby league players, they're interchangeable, aren't they? They would come on and off. So I think we looked at that and probably thought, yeah, that's quite a good thing. I think some teams still use them, but warming players up in game substitutes and getting players out at halftime to do a warm up is miserable.
Yeah,
right, everybody else.
I always think with the way like new stadiums have been built and things like that, surely there's an exercise room or a warm up room that you should be having. But the other side to it is it's very difficult because you want the players to be watching the game and you also want them to be getting information that they're hearing on the bench. And then there also that element of if there's a decision to be made very quickly that you need to bring someone on, well, who goes and gets them? Where are they? How far away is the warm-up room? It's a tough one.
No, definitely. All of those things. Again, it's a balance. There's no right and wrong answer. If you say, yeah, we have a warm-up room and we've got all of the equipment and the kits out there and the players can warm up through that, great. But you want players to be watching the game. You want players to be seeing what's going on. If I come on, I'm playing up against him, and what's he doing? You'll have a better idea than me about this. You weren't really on the bench frequently. You generally
I
started.
was.
Go on then. So when you were on the bench, tell us what it was. Tell us what it was like in terms of
Well,
the
when I
warm
was
up.
a youngster, it was dead easy. I'd run up and down like a blue arse fly because I wanted the managers to think he wants to get on. Then if I'd have been dropped, I'd be pissed off and I'd just amble out. It was like, fuck's sake, fed up. The older you get, the more you think, I need to get ready. Also depends on the tempo of the game. If it's a frenetic game and it's like frantic back and forth, you're thinking, I've got to be ready when I come on to this. But the problem is say if you get the nod and you think, oh, hang about, I haven't warmed up properly yet. I was just getting into it. And then you go on the pitch and you're trying to run around getting your second wind. So it's very difficult as a player to gauge. You don't know when you're going to come on.
Yeah.
You might just suddenly get a, Stephen, you, and you get pulled back and you're like, bloody hell. Or you might be 20 minutes into a warm-up and you're thinking, I'm warm here, I'm ready to go. And then you go, I need to go and sit down for a bit because other people need to come out. You sit down for 5 minutes and you turn around and go, you ready? And you go, I've just dropped.
Yeah.
It's one of the most difficult things, I think, to do.
Yeah.
Really is.
No,
I think
it is.
difficult from a player's point of view and a coach's point of view.
It's certainly not an exact science. And I would contrast that actually to when I worked in the Premier League to working in MLS. You can take all of the players out and the fitness coach goes with them, and essentially we're warming up almost for the entirety of the second half.
Yeah. You can do that in the Champions League and Europe as well, can't you?
Yeah, exactly. So you've got these players, and you've got to be careful which end you pick because you're going to...
Very true.
Generally, I would go towards the away end because our home fans would be giving us grief. It was easier to give stick. I'd rather take stick from the away fans, actually. But yeah, and then I'm mic'd up, and then somebody from the bench is saying, "Send Warney down. He's coming on. Warney, off you go." And it's like you're kind of getting them in that state of readiness, and that balance between readiness and fatigue, and keeping them at a level and not getting them too high and too low. You know, sometimes you can get the warm up wrong and you're exhausting them before. But sometimes there was players who liked that on a match day. I remember Lee Cattermole, you know, it was like getting right into it. He wanted to get his second wind in the warm up.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, before that, you got players who wanted to kind of ease themselves through the warm. So again, that individual approach it's difficult to manage. And on a match day, you very much allowed players a lot more leeway. I wouldn't give anyone sort of a giddy up saying, "Hey, come on, get yourself ready."
Yeah.
Because they're going through their own process in their own way. And I would deliver a team warm-up, and I'm requiring everybody to do the same things. But in terms of the intensities that they're working at, I'd kind
That's
of...
up to them.
Yeah, very much so. I think match day warm-up is for really professional players. I think young players is a little bit different because you're teaching them how to warm up. And that's actually a thing that I've noticed in America out here, especially with youth coaches. I think a bit of it's lazy coaching. It goes back to what you said at the very beginning, where, you know, the fitness coach would let the players get on with it. That happens a lot in the States with youth football. I did a camp last week for Thanksgiving, and we had 24 players at it. And there were better ranked players who were playing for MLS Next and all these. And I asked them, how many of you warm yourselves up versus who as a coach taking through the warm up? And we do want players to be not robots. We want them to be able to understand how to warm themselves up.
Yeah.
With young players, you kind of need to teach them, you know, and this individualized sort of this principle of specificity, we need to be able to teach them that first. And they nearly all said, yeah, we just warm ourselves up.
Yeah, I think we've spoke about this ourselves, haven't we? I do work with a 7 Elite Academy out in Utah, and one of the things we did recently was looking at warm-ups, because most of the coaches are coaches in soccer or football, but they're not coaches in terms of how to warm players up, and they almost don't take it seriously and just think, oh, we'll just have a little bit of a run around. You all warm? You okay? Everyone good? Yeah, let's go. But it's not a dig at the coaches. It's just a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding of what's needed to get into a training session. Like, really, like you say, 15, 20 minutes should be a warm-up. A lot of coaches are like, I will get warm within the session. Well, you've lost a lot of what you need to go into that session to make sure that your session is actually better executed. So the
Yeah,
players are warmer
and
and
especially with
ready for that challenge.
young players, if we're talking about the long-term benefits of the warm-up in terms of performance, and we're talking about this importance of movement, precision, and accuracy, and making players move better, teaching them how to move within the warm-up, doing a lot of your coaching with young players in the warm-up in terms of how do you accelerate, how do you where should your hips be, where should your body be, how do you put your left foot forward, your right foot forward. All of this coaching happens in the warm-up, and again, you get all of this time available to warm players up, and it accumulates into a significant amount of contact time between the fitness coach and the players. So it's a coaching session. You're coaching the players without them really knowing it. But just to sort of wrap things up on this, we spoke at the beginning of this podcast about it has to be structured, it has to be within a framework. So there's a precise sequence that we take players through, both to achieve our short-term aims, which is preparation for the session, and our long-term aims of reducing injuries and improving performance in terms of mechanics and movement. So we've got this thing called the RAMP protocol, which is an acronym: raise, activate, mobilise, and potentiate. And it's kind of an architectural process where each stage is built one on top of the other. And it was developed by a guy called Dr. Ian Jeffries, and he kind of published a paper on it in 2007. We warmed up the same prior to 2007. It wasn't like in 2007 everything changed, but he kind of codified it and he put a name to it and he talked about the process. So it's become, we've kind of adopted that name, the RAMP protocol. But each individual component of this RAMP process must be completed in sequence in order to elevate the player from that status of being at rest to being physically prepared to meet the specific demands of whatever the training session is. So it's, we're feeding into the training session. So if we take each sort of component, raise is we're looking to increase heart rate, blood flow, breathing rate, increase body temperature. That's kind of replacing the old 4 laps of the pitch, right?
Yeah.
That's the extent. So if we take that away from being just do 4 laps of the pitch and we actually start saying we're going to do movement prep. It's not warm up, it's movement preparation. And we require players to move in and out of each other and to accelerate and to decelerate and to change direction under very controlled conditions, then we're actually starting that process. And one of the exercises that I use in this part, which is a really important one, is skipping. I do a lot of skipping within that, and it fulfills a lot of performance development roles. It starts that process of developing balance and proprioception, movement coordination. By the way, if you you get a lot of young players to skip, they can't skip. A lot of
Can't they?
No, it's unbelievable. A lot of young, and actually, I've found that there's a lot of relationship between movement ability and specifically the ability to skip for height and distance, or short and sharp, an A skip, a C skip, all of these different types of skipping that we get players to do.
Yeah.
The better skippers young players are the better players because they can coordinate. They've got better balance coordination. It's a really interesting one.
Get skipping, kids.
Yeah, and then we talk about the stretch shortening capabilities of the muscle. The skip is a really important one. So we're preparing for the session in a highly specific way. Then we go to the activate and mobilize. So we talked about increasing the neuromuscular recruitment of muscles. That's the activate part of the warm-up.
Yeah.
We're switching the muscles on. We're priming the central nervous system. But we're also mobilizing the key joints that are involved in the movement. Players need to be able to move well. And to move well, they need to be able to mobilize. So that's done actively and dynamically. It's not done. This replaces that static stretching component of the old school warm-up, if you like.
Yeah.
static stretch. So if you think about it, your purpose of the raise component is to elevate the heart rate and get the breathing rate up. If you've then got players standing around for 5 minutes, static stretching, then your heart rate drops.
Yeah.
And your breathing rate drops, and you've kind of negated the effects of the first component. So from a practical standpoint, you don't want players performing static stretching. There's also evidence, and people will say, well, why don't you do static stretching anymore in the warm-up? There's evidence to suggest that you're actually reducing the speed and the power and the strength expression of muscles. So I explain it. It's like a spring. If you pull the spring too much, it loses its springiness.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, muscles are the same. If you extend it now, what a lot of practitioners done is they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater and stopped doing static stretching completely. So you can still do your static stretching because players still need to be able to mobilize the joints, but it's a separate part to the warm up. You don't want to do a lot of prolonged static stretching in the warm up. Everything needs to be active. Everything needs to be dynamic. And then the final stage, that P component of the ramp protocol, is potentiate. And that's when we're doing our power and our speed and our agility work. So we'll do a lot of plyometric drills. You know, we'll do a lot of our agility work, which will begin. I'll begin with sort of instructed drills. So it'll be like, right, blue, red, green, and they'll run a pattern. And it'll be a football-specific pattern. And then it'll become increasingly randomized. And this is where the balls might come into it a little bit, where we're doing possessions. That's an agility drill. If we do a little possession or a rondo, because that's quite specific. We're player decision making and movement response is very, very specific to the movement patterns that they're going to be producing in the main body of the session. So it's done in a quite controlled way, but so the whole process of the ramp protocol probably takes 15 minutes. And again, when you think about the warm-up not being just a general period of preparation that players have to do before they get into the training session. The training session is when the real activity takes place. If you think of the warm-up as being a training session in itself, highly specific, highly individualistic, and you can get, as a fitness coach, so many of your performance goals, your speed work, your power work, and so much of your injury prevention work. So they matter. It's not just job justification for fitness coaches.
Well, we'll call that a day. That has been our 19th episode of Strain on the Game, and congratulations on the 19th episode. You have justified why you have a job, or why you had a job in the Premier League for so long, and now you've explained that extremely well to all our listeners and viewers who tune into Strain on the Game. That's been another episode of Strain on the Game. Thanks for listening. Follow us on social media and YouTube at Strain on the Game. Subscribe, like, and follow.